right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. I wanted to talk about my work in the lab of Professor Axel Schulte about cockpit adaptation, about closing the loop with pilots. And I'm going to start with a little motivation. Some of the things have been discussed yesterday. So when you look at the development programs of the next generation fighter, like ICCAS or Tempest, there's always this vision that the pilot is going to have more C2 capabilities, so more command and control capabilities in the cockpit, which means that he needs an overview of the tactical situation in some way, which means that he needs to have the capability to manage a mission across platforms, and also this vision of manned-unmanned teaming. So the pilot is controlling unmanned systems from aboard the aircraft. What does that mean for cockpit design? That means for cockpit design that we're going to have high information load in the cockpit, so the display has to be designed for that. We will see increasing automation, so there will be less manual control, well, eventually system and mission management becomes a primary task. So we had a discussion in this event already with a pilot who said the pilot is not flying anymore, he's more like managing the system. He's a system manager, not a pilot anymore. Pilots don't like it, but I think it's going to happen. So there are, we as human factors researchers know this, there are going to be problems in the interaction with automation, especially with complex automation. And as some phenomena are things we heard before, like attentional tunneling, the vigilant performance decrement, so fatigue, stuff like that, complacency and overtrust, inattentional blindness due to workload peaks, stuff like that. And consequence of a lot of these phenomena is that there is a suboptimal distribution of visual attention in the cockpit. Also of auditive attention, obviously, but that's not my topic. When you think about what the result of this, it's mostly that the pilot is not aware of the current state of the system. He's not aware of the situation, so kind of has low situation awareness, which is the degraded mental state we're going to talk about. And well, Professor Axel Schulte introduced the concept yesterday. One idea we are trying to achieve is that we have like a cooperative assistance system that's supporting the pilot in this complex task of managing his mission and his system. So what are the traits of cooperative assistance? It was mentioned yesterday. There's no explicit delegation, so it acts on its own initiative. But more importantly, for this session, it observes the pilot. It observes the pilot and estimates kind of the cognitive state of it, and then adapts to it. And when you think about these adaptations, you can define different strategies. So you can maybe just adapt to the situation, which is the simple one, but you also can adapt to things like workload, attention, and in my case, I want to adapt to the pilot situation awareness. So in the last years, we developed a tool chain that is trying to estimate what the pilot knows about the state of the system. And in my case, we are using eye tracking for estimating the visual attention. Well, the cockpit is a visual workplace. There is the auditive task as well, but it's dominated by visual tasks. So we start with eye tracking, and from the positions the pilot is looking at, we're trying to infer what information is displayed there. So one requirement for our approach is that you have a very high resolution eye tracking system, and you also can infer the state of information that is displayed at the moment of fixation, which is this system based on. The next step, when you know what the pilot fixated, is you can kind of try to estimate what his knowledge, what his awareness is. There is, of course, the simple assumption that everything the pilot fixates, he perceives, which is not right all the time, but most of the time it works. And when you have that information, you can make, for example, such an assumption that when the pilot has a tactical map in front of him and he looks at the UAV in this case, he fixates it, then what is encoded in a map? What is encoded in a UAV symbol on a map? Well, the position is encoded, and also through the rotation of the symbol, there's also the heading encoded. So we kind of assume at this point, okay, the pilot is aware of the position of the UAV Bravo and of the heading. And when we continuously do this in the aircraft system, so software-based, we can continuously generate a similar model of the situation, but a thing like a ground truth. So here on the bottom, we continuously do the same thing for the system. So when the pilot attends something else, and for example, the UAV moves to another position, the system state changes, and now we can compare these two information. So the thing we think the pilot knows and the thing, the actually state of the system. So when you think about situation awareness, I think, in my opinion, it's important to note that this is always information specific. It's always tied to the domain. So you can't speak about situation awareness without a domain. There's no like number between 0 or 1, which is high or low situation, but it's always tied to information of the system or of the task context. Another example, simple one, when, for example, a pop-up SAM air threat pops up, the pilot has not looked at it. Maybe he knows it's there, but he definitely doesn't know where it is. So we have kind of an estimation of the awareness. It's maybe just level 1 awareness, if you want to think about it in that way. So he didn't perceive this information. And now, when we have this information about the pilot, about the system, we can use it to trigger alerts, to trigger adaptions in the cockpit. So this is an important step of our research. We try to close the loop and bring it into realistic or synthetic task environment. So our first question, so this approach, it worked reasonably well in laboratory tasks. So easy, not easy, but simple pilot tasks, like tracking a route or something like that. So one question remaining after we evaluated this was, okay, what are information that are relevant in realistic use cases for a fighter or even in a MAN-T environment? So what we did is we performed a goal-directed task analysis to identify which information are relevant in which situations. For this, we interviewed 8 fighter pilots from the German Air Force, each pilot 2 hours, based on an exemplary mission. And the result, well, it's not complete. It is like a big hierarchy. Just a brief overview. There are 5 main goals for the fighter pilots. He has to, obviously, these things are obvious in retrospective. You have to operate the aircraft. You have to execute your mission task. You have to evaluate your mission plan, supervised unmanned assets or manned assets. Currently, there are only manned assets to supervise for a fighter pilot, but in the future, maybe not. And communicate with C2. And the whole idea of the analysis is to break down this whole goal structure until you reach a point where you can't like define a goal, but you have to make a decision. So the pilot is continuously making a decision in the cockpit, subconsciously or consciously. For example, is change of heading necessary to capture the desired flight path? And now the analysis, you try to structure, okay, what information does he really need to make that decision? And I think the important part about the analysis is that it's not really dependent on the platform. So you should not focus on a display element or something. But you should focus on the semantic of the information behind it. So in this case, it's planned route, waypoint should be known, also the current position of the fighter and its heading. And then after that, we conducted this whole analysis and generated the structure. We selected a few use cases and brought that into the simulator. So we tried to implement this whole loop for a few use cases. And I have brought a video of this simple example with the route tracking. So on the top left, you see the HUD, and on the left bottom, you see the tactical map. There's a route, so the pilot has the task of just tracking this route. And this is kind of the live view of the cognitive state estimation. In the video, there's not much happening because the pilot, you see in white, I hope you see it, he's kind of focusing outside because he's controlling the autopilot. It does not behave as he expected. So he's really focused on getting the autopilot to do what he wants. And now he just loses track of the new waypoint of the current route. And this live estimation knows this already. So these gray nodes. These nodes are gray when there's like a high deviation in the thing the pilot has perceived versus the system state, and it will issue a few seconds after the route deviation got too high. It will issue an alert, so the pilot will have a visual alert and also an auditive alert. Yeah, that's the one. So we implemented this and other use cases, and had three fighter pilots in 3 missions. So unfortunately, not enough time to talk about every mission in detail. But I think I want to discuss one thing about the experiment. What I experienced when I was working with adaptive systems is that when you don't tell the pilots how the system is adapting, that you will get negative results in terms of subjective negative results, because pilots are used to having transparent system. We talked about this a lot in this conference. And I think when you bring an adaptive system into a realistic application, the pilots will be trained with it anyway. So they will have extensive training to know their cooperative assistance system. So in this case, we also extensively briefed the pilots about the system functionality, which had one interesting result in the end. Also 1 in 5 hours of training and a debriefing after each mission. And I just summed up the key points. So the adoption was accepted well. There with 3 fighter pilots, there's not much statistics to do, but more observations and comments by the pilot. They considered most use cases to be useful, but they criticized more or less the design of the interaction. So visual adaptions were preferred to auditive notifications. I think mostly because the visual adaption is there for a few seconds, or for, I don't know, 10 to 15 seconds, whereas the auditive notification is there and then it's gone. And this is the interesting part, I think. So in a few situations, the pilots, and they did not monitor some part of the system because they knew, even if I don't monitor it, the system is going to tell me. In this case, it was a message which was going to tell the new route, the new altitude to track. And one pilot, he relied on just the system telling him. So he kind of worked together. I don't know if you can call it like a work agreement, but the pilot knew how the system behaved, and he took and he used that. Another thing we just heard also had effects in my experiment. When workload is high, pilot ignores system indications. That's a normal thing. So we have to think about timing of intervention and design of intervention. And further, pilots disliked indications that merely told them information they should know from a perspective of good SA. That means when pilots see a notification, they expect that they have to do something about it. So they have to that there's some kind of action. And just telling them here, I think you should know that, was not well perceived by the pilots. So the conclusion is, well, the task analysis part is helpful to get to know the domain in general. And it's a good fit for this approach specifically because, well, yeah, I'm looking on the information that is relevant. And well, we had overall positive evaluation, but there are 2 open issues I think we should concentrate right now on, and that is the timing of intervention. So we should think about, is the intervention critical? Then obviously you should intervene immediately, or when it's not critical, you should wait until the pilot can be open for that thing. So you may need another observation module that observes when the pilot is ready for something like that. So in another observation part, okay, new complexity. Second thing, the design of intervention. If the intervention is critical, and in the panel discussion yesterday, there was a good, I think a good idea. when it's critical, you need to bring the pilot out of his focus. So you need maybe black out the screens and write you are stalling. This was the example yesterday. And I think there is something like cognitive countermeasures, which was here at SUPAERO. I read a paper about. So these are like new interventions, maybe very severe interventions. If it's critical, and if it's not, well, then it should not be so critical in the design, obviously. Yeah, that's it. I'm finished. Open for questions.